Good afternoon. Welcome to Grade 12 English First Additional Language. Today we continue with the series of lessons on Macbeth. We're still busy with Act 3. So please have your Macbeth book and your notes with you that you can follow and add notes as I'm explaining. So it's a beautiful day to learn something new. So here we go. So we ended with Act 3, Scene 3, where Banquo is killed, but Fleance escaped, and where the murderers had to come to report back to Macbeth. And remember, we see the fact that Fleance escaped indicates that Macbeth is unable to undo the witch's predictions. Now, the summary of Act 3, Scene 4, we can read through it together. Macbeth, acting as the perfect host, welcomes the Thanes to the feast. The first murderer enters at the door and is joined by Macbeth. The murderer reports that Banquo has been killed, but that Fleance has escaped. Macbeth is distressed, and Lady Macbeth has to remind him of his duties as a host. At that very moment that he expresses regret at Banquo's absence, Banquos Ghost, visible only to Macbeth, enters and sits down on Macbeth's chair. Very important that he sits on Macbeth's chair. Macbeth is horrified and, believing everybody can see the ghost, starts a one-sided conversation with the ghost. And with this, he incriminates himself in everything he says to the ghost. He gains control over himself, but when he drinks a toast to Banquo, the ghost reappears and he loses all control, expressing his fear. Lady Macbeth hastily sends the guest away. Everybody is now suspicious. Macbeth is angry at the fact that Macduff refused to attend the banquet. We discover that he has a paid spy in every nobleman's house. He decides that Macduff will be his next victim. And he will also go to the witches to find out what the future holds for him. So this is very important. This time he decides to go to the witches. He commits himself to further deeds of blood in order to keep his power. Right, the setting where it's a hall in the palace. A banquet is prepared. Enter Macbeth, Lady Macbeth, Ross, Lennox, the lords, and the attendants. Now, at this banquet, Macbeth and Lady Macbeth welcome the guests to the feast. A banquet represents many virtues. It is a ceremonious and orderly occasion at which men trust each other enough to eat together and celebrate things like life, generosity, friendship, love, and security. And this is the first state banquet since Macbeth took over, and it is supposed to be symbolic of the return of order. But yet it ends in the greatest disorder to date. It is, however, also meant to supply Macbeth with a perfect alibi for the murder of Banquo. About this scene. In this scene, the climax of the play, Macbeth is trying to recapture the ordered, friendly existence that he has destroyed, as we just said, by hosting the banquet. Up to this time, with all his hesitation, wild fancies and suspicions, he has had the ability and the strength of mind and self-control to push forward to his goals and to hide from public view the bloody means by which he had obtained them. In this scene, however, we see a fatal collapse of his powers. Confronted by the ghost of Banquo, he loses all the self-control and, in plain hearing of all the assembled nobility, breaks out into speeches which unavoidably betrayed his guilt. He speaks to the ghost as if they were alone together. In this scene, he passes altogether beyond his wife's control. She's utterly unable to control or restrain him. Macbeth plays the part as host, as the nobles take their places at the banquet table. He welcomes everyone personally, but the real reason why he's not sitting down at the table is because he's still waiting for the return of the murderers to report back about what happened to Banquo. He starts when he says, "You know your degrees, sit down. At first and last, a hearty welcome." So sit according to your ranks or positions in the society, from the highest to the lowest rank. Okay, now, as I said, this is the first state occasion over which Macbeth presides as king. It's supposed to symbolize the return of order under the rule of the new king, but we all know, because of the appearance of Banquos Ghost and Macbeth losing all self-control, it fails dismally. And then Macbeth continues where he says he will move among the guests at the banquet. And then he used a very important word, and play the humble host. The word play draws attention to the fact that Macbeth is simply playing the role of being king. He's not supposed to be, he's not worthy to be king. And he goes on and he says, "Our hostess keeps her state, but in best time we will require her welcome." So Lady Macbeth will remain on her throne, and at a fitting moment he will ask her to wish them all welcome. Lady Macbeth responds by a request to Macbeth to welcome them heartily on her behalf. And then enter first murderer at the door. Now just then, the first murderer appears at the door unseen by the guest. You'll see as we read through this slide, Macbeth keeps talking while he moves towards the door, and he points out to Lady Macbeth that the nobles respond to her greeting and return her good wishes. So now he is talking while approaching the door, and while he's talking, he's saying the following. He's saying, "There's an equal number of people on either side of the table. Here I'll sit in the midst. I will sit in the middle." And then he says to everyone, "Enjoy yourself abundantly. We will soon drink a toast to the health of everybody present by passing a cup of wine around the table." And now he has moved towards the door. He approached the door and he sees the murderer and he talks to him. He says, "There's blood upon thy face." So he greets the murderer, commenting that there's blood on his face. And then the murderer replies, "It is Banquos then, that it is Banquos' blood." And Macbeth answers him with a very cold-blooded remark where he says, "It's better to see Banquos' blood on your face than it to be inside his body." And then is he dispatched? He asks if Banquo has been killed, and then, "My lord, his throat is cut, that did for him." And he replied, obviously, that he personally cut Banquo's throat. And then in the next part that Macbeth is speaking, he congratulates the murderer on being the best of all murderers, but added, the one who killed Fleance would be just as good. And then he says, "If you killed Fleance too, you would be without equal, the best of all murderers." And the murderer had to give Macbeth the bad news. Most royal Sir Fleance has escaped. And then Macbeth, aside to himself, he says, "Then comes my fit again." So he's deeply shocked when the murderer admits that Fleance escaped, and immediately is overcome by feelings of doubt and fear and anxiety. "My fit, I had else been perfect." The word perfect, if Fleance had been killed too, he would have felt completely safe, confident, and secure in his position as king. And then he uses a simile, "whole as the marble, founded as the rock." So he says, as solid as marble and as unmovable as a rock. These images suggest things that are hard, solid, and immovable, making them very secure, as free and invulnerable as the surrounding air. And then he goes on, he says, "But now he is imprisoned, caged, bound and enslaved by persistent, tormenting and uncontrolled fears and uncertainties." So the fact that Fleance is alive is the cause of his uncontrolled fears and uncertainties. Right? And then he goes on, "Well, at least Banquo is dead." And the murderer answers him, "Yes, my good lord, he lies in a ditch with 20 deep wounds in his head." Any one of these wounds would have been enough to kill him. So it shows us it's a particular brutal murder, an example of overkill, which shows the intense anger of the murderers. And this description of the brutality of the murder is important, as it is going to influence Macbeth's vision of Banquos Ghost. The simile that I just showed to you on the previous slide was asked in a paper where it says explain or name and explain the figure of speech found in this line hole as the marble found it as the rock. It is obviously a simile, and the simile emphasizes that just as marble is whole or perfect or flawless, so too was Macbeth. He was well and sound and fit before hearing that Fleance has escaped. Remember, the fact that Fleance is alive is the cause of his uncontrolled fears and uncertainties. And now a question was asked as well. Discuss the theme of violence evident in this scene. And yes, just a few examples you can use in your answer. A bloody Banquo appears as a ghost and is only visible to Macbeth. We will see that now. Banquo was betrayed by his best friend, Macbeth, because of greed. Macbeth killed his best friend who saved his life in battle. The ghost of Banquo sits on the king's chair as a symbol of his children who will rule Scotland, and to make it clear that Macbeth does not belong on that chair as king. That point is very important to remember. Why did Banquo sit specifically on Macbeth's chair? And the apparition can be Banquo's revenge, that's the appearance of his ghost, and the ghost of Banquo can be a personification of Macbeth's fear and guilt. As I said, this is a question and an answer from a previous paper. Macbeth thanks the murderer when he talks again, and he remarks the following: "There the grown serpent lies, the worm that's fled, hath nature that in time will venom breed, no teeth for the present." Right, so he remarks that the adult snake, Banquo, is dead, but the worm, Fleance, that has escaped, will grow up and become dangerous later. He's too young to be a threat at this moment. So Fleance's escape is not an immediate danger to Macbeth's rule, but he anticipates at a later time when Fleance might wish to avenge his father's death by killing Macbeth. Right, and then he dismisses the murderer until the following day, and the murderer leaves. Right, and then Lady Macbeth comes toward Macbeth, and she reminds him that he does not give a friendly welcome or show the necessary hospitality to his guest. So he's not proposing the toast that he has promised. And she goes on, she says, "A feast is no better than a meal that is paid for if the guests are not frequently made to feel welcome. Otherwise, it becomes meaningless and cold. It would then be better to eat at home, because away from home, formal ceremonies are needed to make the feast a special occasion." So she's just reminding him of his responsibilities as the host. And then Macbeth thanks Lady Macbeth for reminding him of his duties as the host, and he encourages everyone to eat. Now, good digestion waits on appetite and health on both. You're wishing them a good appetite attended by good digestion. And then Lennox invites Macbeth to sit down, but at that moment, Banquos Ghost enters and sits on Macbeth's chair. Right, so notice that the ghost does not sit in the place reserved for Banquo, but in Macbeth's place. And as we said, the ghost of Banquo sits on the king's chair as a symbol of his children who will rule Scotland, and to make it clear that Macbeth does not belong on that chair as king. Right. And then Macbeth continues and he says, "If only the noble Banquo were present at the feast, all the nobility in the country would be assembled under one roof." So it is interesting that no mention is made of Macduff, who is also absent. And then he goes on, who may I rather challenge for unkindness than pity? He hopes that they would be able to blame Banquo for his absence rather than pity him for any accident that may have delayed him. Right, he knows exactly what happened to Banquo and still he makes that remark. Okay, two other questions that were asked on this part of the play discuss the theme appearance versus reality. So Macbeth is in a troubled state of mind as he had learned that Fleance has escaped. However, Lady Macbeth reminds him that he has to appear cheerful at the banquet and be welcoming to the guests. Another one, Macbeth proposes a toast which is supposed to be a joyous occasion. However, Macbeth feigns happiness as he just had Banquo murdered, and Macbeth does not reveal to Lady Macbeth that he has had Banquo murdered. And then another question, the dead Banquo has the right to haunt Macbeth. Discuss your view. Remember, it's always very important when you are asked to discuss your view, your answer must be grounded in the text, and that's where it comes in. You make your point, you explain it, you give an example, and you link to the question. Right, so Banquo was killed innocently in a ferocious manner. Macbeth's greed caused him to kill an innocent man. Fleance, or one of Banquo's sons, was supposed to be the king, but Macbeth took the privilege away from them. The dead Banquo is trying to take revenge, and the dead Banquo is not going to make it easy for Macbeth because Macbeth is the cause of the unhappiness and destruction of Scotland. Right, then we go on, where Ross just says his absence, sir, lays blame upon his promise. So the emphasis on Banquo continues with Ross saying Banquo is to blame for having broken his promise. And then, please it your highness to grace us with your royal company. So Ross invites Macbeth to honor them by sitting down with them. Right, and then Macbeth says, but the table is full. Banquos Ghost is a creation of Macbeth's guilt-ridden mind. It is sitting on Macbeth's place, but only Macbeth can see him. Macbeth, however, believes that everybody can see the ghost. It is significant that Banquos Ghost takes Macbeth's place at the table. Macbeth is a usurper. Remember, usurper means someone who takes position of power illegally. Right? And he does not deserve the position as king of a king. Right, and then Lennox says, but here's a place reserved, sir. Where? Here, my good lord. What is that moves your highness? What is upsetting you? So Lennox points to the chair reserved for Macbeth, and everybody is shocked at the sudden change in Macbeth's behavior, because then, which of you have done this? He does not realize at first that he's seeing Banquo's ghost. He thinks that one of the guests has played a trick on him by planting Banquo's corpse in the seat. And everybody is asking, what, my good lord? And then he is addressing the ghost. He goes into a one-sided conversation with Banquo's ghost. He says, thou canst not say I did it. Now it is the murder. He shifts the blame entirely onto the murderer, as if they are solely responsible. And then he believes the ghost with its blood-matted hair is silently accusing him. He commands it, never shake thy gory locks at me. He commands it not to shake his blood-stained hair or head at him. And then Ross immediately says he suggests that they should all leave since the king appears to be ill, right? But Lady Macbeth at this moment suspects that Macbeth is seeing Duncan's ghost. Exercising the most rigid self-control, she takes him aside and urges him to pull himself together. Right, first she addresses the people. She tries to make excuses to save the situation. She claims Macbeth has had similar attacks ever since his youth, but they don't last long. She asks them not to pay any attention to him, as it will only worsen and prolong the attack. And then she talks to Macbeth. She says, "Are you a man?" So she senses that everything they dreamt of and worked for is slipping away. And she tries to get Macbeth to regain control. She tries to use a former argument to get him to pull himself together. She accuses him of being a coward. She has, however, lost her ability to manipulate him. So now Macbeth answers him. He believes he is indeed a courageous man who is able to look at something so horrible that it would frighten the devil himself. What he sees is the image of Banquet with 20 stab wounds to his head and a cut throat. And then Lady Macbeth answers him again, "This is absolute nonsense. Oh, proper stuff. It is just like an imaginary fear, just like the vision or hallucination you saw of a dagger which you claimed led you to Duncan's room. These false fears would be a more appropriate reaction to a story told by an old woman at a winter fire, retelling stories which she first heard from her grandmother, an old woman's tale." So it's devoid of any truth or substance. And then she says, "Shame itself. You are a disgrace." So the personification of shame and cowardice, this is typical of her attitude. She's far more practical person than her husband. All right. And then she says, "You look but on a stool. After all, it's just an empty chair you are looking at." Not knowing anything about Banquo's murder, she still believes he imagines seeing Duncan's ghost. And then pointing at the ghost, Macbeth urges his wife to look at it. The ghost nods at him, maybe shakes his head in accusation, and he tells the ghost that if it cannot, it should speak to him too. "If thou canst not, speak too." And then he goes on, he says, "If the dead refuses to remain in their graves, they will in future leave the dead bodies unburied so that vultures can devour them. Then the birds' stomachs, the maws, will become their tombs." Right, and then Lady Macbeth, what quite unmanned in folly. The ghost disappeared, and Lady Macbeth is deeply shocked at her husband's incoherence and asked him if his weakness and foolishness has completely destroyed his manhood. And Macbeth just said, "As surely as I stand here, I saw him." So the ghost has disappeared for now. Right, and then Lady Macbeth, again, she repeats her disgust at his behavior. "You should be ashamed of yourself." And then Macbeth answers her, "People have committed bloody murders from the earliest time before civilized laws. And recently, unspeakable violent murders have also been committed. Once when a man has been killed, he would be dead, and that would be the end of it. But now the dead comes back to life, even though he has 20 fatal head wounds, and take our seats, his seat, at the feast, or take our thrones." That's now his throne. So Macbeth sees Banquo as a threat to his kingship. He is thinking of the murderer's report on the gruesomeness of the murder of Banquo. Right, and then she goes on, she says, "My worthy lord, your noble friends do lack you." So on seeing that Macbeth is talking more sensibly, she now speaks aloud for all to hear and reminds Macbeth that he is neglecting his guests. Right, and then fully recovered, he says, "I do forget. Do not muse at me, my most worthy friends." So fully recovered from his experience, Macbeth asked the nobles not to be puzzled or surprised by his strange behavior. And he goes on by using his wife's excuse. He claims to suffer from a strange illness which does not alarm or affect his closest friends who know him well. So they are used to it. And then again, he says, "Come, love and health to all." He starts with a toast. Then I'll sit down, give me some wine, full, and then re-enters the ghost. The moment Macbeth mentions Banquo, the ghost reappears. All right, I drink to the general joy of the whole table and to our dear friends Banquo. The ghost reappears. So he proposes a toast to all the guests and to his dear friend Banquo, whom he misses very badly. And he expresses the wish that Banquo were here. Again, Banquos Ghost arrives when invited to do so. The guests drink to Macbeth, pledging him their loyalty and duty. Macbeth sees the ghost, and then at this point, he is badly shocked and shouts at it to go away. Avaunt and quit my sight, let the earth hide thee. Thy bones are marrowless, thy blood is cold. Thou hast no speculation in those eyes which thou dost glare with. So there's no power of sight or intelligence or understanding in your eyes. So the ghosts seem to be staring at him with glazed, sightless eyes, and he shouts at it to go back to its grave. Hide thee. He is dead and cannot see with those eyes that stare so accusingly at him. And then Lady Macbeth just says, think of this as normal behavior, something that happens often and not to be amazed at. But unfortunately, it spoils the pleasure or enjoyment of the evening. And then Macbeth goes on, he protests that he does not lack the courage of a normal man. He's prepared to meet anything which man dares to encounter. And then on the slide in front of you, he mentions the things he would dare to encounter. He mentions the fiercest bear, a bear, and a rhinoceros, a tiger. He says, I would face all of those, but I would face anything except that of the murdered Banquo, and he would not show any fear. So Macbeth claims that he is immune to the most dangerous beast, but not to Banquo's ghost. And then he invites Banquo to return to life and to challenge him to a sword fight in the desert. And then he says, if I am frightened, then you can call me a girl's doll or a baby girl. In other words, a useless weakling lacking manly courage. And then he says, go away, horrible shadow. And the ghost exits. The ghost disappears again. So the moment the ghost disappears, then Macbeth regains self-control. And then he says, I'm a man again, pray you, sit still. He requests the guests to remain seated. And this shows that they are all risen and in a reaction to his newest outburst. But then Lady Macbeth answers and says, no, you have spoiled the pleasant atmosphere of the evening with your surprising lack of self-control. So Macbeth's disorderly, agitated behavior has aroused surprise, amazement, and above all, suspicion. Right, and then Macbeth is just, can such things be? So he's under the impression that the guests have also seen the ghost. And he expresses amazement that they showed so little surprise. And he says, I considered myself a brave man, but now I have doubts about myself when you can look at such terrible sights and not show fear. So he sees his wife and the other guests as unaffected and unmoved by the horrible sight. And that makes him question his own bravery, as they did not even turn pale at the horrible sight of the ghost. He still does not realize he's the only one that can see the ghost. Right, and then Ross starts asking questions. What sights, my lord? So by now all the guests are curious and some even suspicious. Macbeth still believes that everybody could see the ghost, and he is so caught up in the horror of the ghostly vision that he cannot think rationally. He might have given himself away at this point if his wife did not intervene. Right, and then she says, I pray you, speak not. So she begs them not to ask Macbeth any questions. Right, and then she says, At once, good night. Stand not upon the order of your going, but go at once. So she intervenes before Macbeth can answer, claiming that further questions will aggravate the situation, and she asks the Lord to leave immediately, disregarding their particular rank. So the theme of order versus disorder, ironically, the feast was meant to show that order has been restored, and it just showed the opposite. Lady Macbeth intervenes before Macbeth can answer. She does not know what Macbeth has seen because she does not know about Banquo's murder yet, and suspects that maybe he is seeing Duncan's ghost. She realizes that Macbeth is now so agitated that if people start questioning him, he may confess his crimes. And then on this slide, Macbeth says that there is an old saying, the dead will have their revenge. Gravestones have been known to move and trees to speak, to bring guilty men to justice. The craftiest murderers have been exposed by mystical signs made by crows and magpies. Right, and then he asked Lady Macbeth, what time is it? And she says, dawn is about to break. Right, and then he asks his wife what she thinks of Macduff's refusal to attend the feast in spite of his royal command. Macduff is emerging now as chief opponent to Macbeth. Macbeth is zooming in on his next victim, another person who threatens his security. Lady Macbeth asked, but did you send to him, sir? Right? And then he says, because Lady Macbeth asked if Macbeth has sent for Macduff, and Macbeth replies that somebody has mentioned Macduff's refusal to attend the banquet casually in a conversation, and he plans to send for him early the next morning. And then we learn that Macbeth keeps a paid spy in every nobleman's house. Remember, it is a servant that he paid to act as a spy. If there's a question on that, you have to answer it like that as well. You have to write down that it is a servant that Macbeth paid to act as a spy. So that spy, this servant, was placed in every nobleman's house to inform Macbeth of everything the Thanes do or say. A treacherous act of Macbeth which shows his mental deterioration. Remember, he does not trust anybody. He goes on to say, I will tomorrow and betimes I will to the weird sisters. So Macbeth decides there to go and see the witches, and his decision to seek out the witches deliberately emphasizes his total commitment to evil. Right, and then he says, more shall they speak, for now I am bent to know by the worst means the worst. So he's determined to find out what the future holds for him, good or bad. He has been driven to such a pitch of suspense that any certainty about the outcome of events in future, even if it's bad news, will be a relief. And then for mine own good, all causes shall give way. He's prepared to sacrifice everything in order to get what he wants. And then he used a very important metaphor where he says, stepped in so far that should I wade no more, returning were as tedious as going over. So the metaphor, Macbeth uses the image of a man crossing a river of blood. He has already reached the halfway mark, and he feels that it is pointless to retrace his steps. He has shed so much blood that there's no turning back. He chooses to continue on this path of evil and murder. And then goes on where he says, strange things I have in head that will to hand. So he has strange ideas like killing Macduff in mind, which must be carried out before they are thought through. He will play the role of the villain, which must be acted ere they may be scanned. So he is abandoning thought. And thus his imagination, which was part of this thought process and served as a brake to his actions. He will now act before he thinks. He will act on impulse. All right. So Lady Macbeth just answers him, you need sleep, right? She knows neither of them can enjoy peaceful sleeping. And then he answers her, come will to sleep. My strange and self-abuse is the initiate fear that wants hard use. So he thinks he can harden his mind and cure himself of tormenting visions and nightmares by committing more murders. Pure, unnatural, senseless, and wasteful destruction, all in an effort to overcome his suspicion and insecurity. And then he says, we are but young indeed, which means we are but inexperienced in crime. So it's an ill foreboding for the future of Scotland. From now on, he will kill without any hesitation. He will not allow his conscience to affect any decision that he is going to make. That concludes our lesson for today. I sincerely hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. I will see you all tomorrow again. In the meantime, have a wonderful afternoon. Make wise choices. Goodbye.